I pulled into the parking lot of the Oak Ridge Community Center just as the full sun was going down over Vancouver. The air had that cool October feeling that makes you pull your jacket a little tighter. I wasn't thinking I would find anyone I knew there. I had just finished my evening walk and thought I'd go through here to stay away from the traffic on Main Street. That's when I saw him. My son Thomas was sitting on the bench near the entrance. Next to him was my granddaughter Sophie, her backpack at her feet and her science project, a carefully built model of the solar system, sitting on her lap. But what made my heart feel heavy was seeing their suitcases. 2 of them, old and beat up, the kind you don't use unless you have to. Thomas looked up as I walked closer. Even in the fading light, I could see how tired he looked. He was 42 years old, but right then, he looked older than I felt. "Dad," he said, his voice sounding empty. "I didn't know you walked this way." "I don't usually." I sat down beside him, my knees hurting a little. "Thomas, what's going on? Why aren't you at work?" He let out a long breath, the kind that shows you've had a really bad day. "I got laid off this morning." "Budget cuts," they said. "Last hired, first fired." Sophie was watching me with those big brown eyes, so much like her mother's. She was 8 years old and way too young to understand why her world was being turned upside down. "Grandpa," she said quietly, "are we going to live with you now?" I looked at Thomas. "What happened?" He rubbed his face with both hands. "Catherine's mother happened. Patricia Sterling in all her glory." He said the name with an anger I'd never heard from him before. When I got home after being let go, I thought Catherine would understand. We'd figure something out together, you know, but her mother was there. She'd been staying with us for the past month. And he stopped, shaking his head. "She what?" She said that this was proof that Catherine had married someone below her level, that I'd never amount to anything, just like my father before me. He looked at me then, and I saw the shame in his eyes. She said our family line wasn't good enough for the Sterling name. She told Catherine it was time to cut her losses. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, not yet, just a quiet, clear feeling. "And Catherine?" Thomas's voice cracked. "She asked me to leave. Just for a few days," she said, "to give her mother time to calm down, to give everyone space to think." He pointed to the suitcases. I packed what I could, grabbed Sophie from her after-school program. I didn't know where else to go. "You should have called me." "I know. I needed to think first, to figure out what I was going to tell you." I looked at Sophie again. She was hugging her solar system project, and I noticed that Saturn's rings were a little crushed on one side. "Did you eat dinner?" I asked her. She shook her head. I stood up. My decision was made. "Get in the car. Both of you. We're going home." "Dad, I can't just..." "Thomas." I looked down at my son. "Get in the car." Something in my voice must have convinced him because he stood up and reached for the suitcases. I took one of them. It was heavier than it looked. Sophie grabbed her backpack and her project. As we walked to my old Honda Civic, Sophie slipped her small hand into mine. "Grandpa, are you mad at us?" I squeezed her hand gently. "No, sweetheart, I'm not mad at you or your dad. Not even a little bit." "Then who are you mad at?" I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "Nobody you need to worry about right now." The drive to my house in East Vancouver took 20 minutes. Thomas sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window. Sophie fell asleep in the back, her head resting against her science project. I could see her in the rearview mirror, her face peaceful in a way that made my chest ache. I'd lived in the same house for 35 years. It was a simple 2-bedroom house, nothing fancy. The paint was peeling in places, and the roof would need replacing in another year or 2. But it was paid off. It was warm, and it was home. When we pulled into the driveway, Thomas finally spoke. "I'm sorry, Dad." "For what?" "For failing. For proving Patricia right." I turned off the engine and sat there in the darkness. "Thomas, the only thing you failed at is choosing a wife who values a mother's opinion over her husband's dignity. That's not a failure. That's a learning experience." She called you, and nobody said that you'd wasted your life in that textile factory, that I was going to do the same. She said Sophie deserved better than to grow up around failure. I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Let's get Sophie inside. We can talk after." We carried everything in. Sophie woke up enough to walk, and I directed her to the guest bedroom. My home office, really, but I put a daybed in there years ago for when they visited. Thomas would take the couch. It wasn't perfect, but it would do. I made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, simple comfort food. Sophie ate hers slowly, still half asleep, and then brushed her teeth in the bathroom while Thomas and I cleaned up. After I tucked Sophie in and read her a chapter from a book on her nightstand, something about a girl who could talk to animals, I came back out to find Thomas sitting at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. I poured us both coffee, even though it was past 9 o'clock. Some conversations need coffee. Tell me everything, I said, and he did. He told me about how Patricia Sterling had never approved of the marriage, how she tried to talk Catherine out of it right up until the wedding day, how she'd made little comments over the years about Thomas's job, his future, his family background, how Catherine had always defended him. But lately, since her father had died and left Patricia alone, she'd been spending more and more time with her mother. I thought we could get through it, Thomas said. I thought our marriage was strong enough. But when I lost my job today, it was like a switch flipped. Patricia was already at the house when I got there. I think Catherine must have called her right away. And Patricia she tore into me, said I'd wasted Catherine's best years, said that Catherine could do better, that she could find someone from her own circle, someone worthy. And Catherine, he laughed, but there was no humor in it. She said nothing. She said she needed time, that her mother had good points, that maybe we'd rushed into things. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. We've been married for 9 years. Dad, Sophie is 8 years old. What part of that was rushed? I sipped my coffee. What do you want to do? I don't know. Find another job, I guess. Prove them wrong. Show Patricia that I'm not a failure. Thomas, you're not a failure. You've never been a failure. But I don't have anything. No savings. Catherine handled the money, and most of my paycheck went into the joint account. No future plans, no rich family to fall back on. He looked at me. I'm 42 years old, and I'm sleeping on my father's couch. There are worse places to be. He shook his head. Patricia was right about one thing. I'm just like you. I worked hard my whole life, and I got nothing to show for it. No safety net, no backup plan, just nothing. That's when I put down my coffee cup and looked at my son, really looked at him. Thomas, I said quietly, there are some things you don't know about me. He frowned. What do you mean? I mean that Patricia Sterling doesn't know everything. Catherine doesn't know everything. And you don't know everything. Dad, what are you talking about? I stood up and went to the small bookshelf in the living room. Behind a row of old paperbacks, there was a folder. I kept it there for years, never needing to look at it, but always knowing it was there. I brought it back to the table and opened it in front of Thomas. Inside were documents, legal papers, investment statements, business papers. Thomas stared at them. I don't understand. When you were young, your mother and we didn't have much. You remember that? He nodded slowly. I worked at the textile factory for 30 years. Different shifts, overtime, everything I could get. Your mother worked, too. Cleaning houses, taking in sewing. We saved every penny we could. We wanted you to have opportunities we didn't have. I know that, Dad. I've always known that. What you didn't know is what I did with those savings. After your mother passed away, God rest her soul, I had some money left over. Not much, but some. And I had time, a lot of time, and nothing but memories to fill it. I pulled out one of the documents. It was a stock certificate dated 15 years ago. I started learning about investing. Went to the library, read books, watched videos online. I started small, very small. A few $100s here and there, invested in companies I believed in. Technology, mostly. Companies that were making things that seemed useful, that seemed like they'd matter in the future. Thomas was reading the documents now, his eyes getting wider. Over the years, I kept working, kept saving, kept investing. Nothing big, nothing flashy. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to make your own way, to not rely on me or anyone else. I wanted you to be strong, to be independent. Dad, these numbers, I know what the numbers say. Thomas looked up at me. You're a millionaire. Several times over, if we're being exact. He sat back, shocked. All this time. All this time. But you still live in this house. You still drive that old Honda. I live the way I choose to live. The money isn't for fancy cars or big houses. It's invested. It's growing. And it's waiting. Waiting for what? I smiled. For the right moment. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, Patricia Sterling. Her family's company. Sterling Imports. Yes, I know it well. How, Thomas? I pay attention. When you married Catherine, I made it my business to know everything about the Sterlings, their company, their finances, their business dealings. Did you know that Sterling Imports has been struggling for the past 3 years? He shook his head. They've been losing contracts to cheaper competitors. Their market share is down. Their debt is up. They need a big cash investment or a buyout within the next 6 months, or they'll be forced to sell everything. You've been watching them. I've been watching a lot of things. I pulled out another document. I also happen to know that their biggest competitor, Pacific Trade Solutions, is looking to expand. They need distribution networks in Western Canada, which is exactly what Sterling Imports has. It would be a perfect buy. And let me guess, you're invested in Pacific Trade Solutions. I'm not just invested. I'm their largest private shareholder. The boss, Richard Chen, is a friend of mine. We've worked together on several ventures over the years. Thomas was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Who are you? I laughed. I'm your father. I'm Walter Morrison, the man who spent 30 years in a textile factory. I'm the man who raised you to be honest and hardworking and kind. I'm also the man who learned that there's more than one way to be successful and that the quietest people in the room are often the ones who understand power the best. So, what are you going to do? I finished my coffee. I'm going to make a phone call. And then I'm going to help my son get back on his feet. And then, well, we'll see what happens after that. The next morning, I made pancakes for Sophie while Thomas slept on the couch. She came walking into the kitchen in her pajamas, her hair sticking up in every direction. Morning, sweetheart, I said. How'd you sleep? Okay. She climbed into a chair. Grandpa, are Mom and Dad getting divorced? The question was so direct, so innocent, that it took me a moment to respond. I don't know, I said honestly. But whatever happens, your dad and I are going to make sure you're okay. You know that, right? She nodded, but she looked worried. Tell you what, I said, sliding a plate of pancakes in front of her. After breakfast, how about we work on fixing Saturn's rings on your solar system project? I noticed they got a bit squished. Her face brightened. Really? You know how to fix them. I think we can figure it out together. We spent the morning at the kitchen table, carefully reshaping the wire rings and reattaching them to the foam ball. Sophie told me all about her project, about how she'd researched each planet, about how Saturn was her favorite because it was beautiful and unique. Mrs. Henderson says that everyone thinks Saturn is just pretty, but it's also really strong, Sophie said. The rings are made of ice and rock, and they've been there for millions of years. They survive because they are flexible. They bend, but they don't break. That's a good lesson, I said. Thomas came out around 10 o'clock, looking better after a full night's sleep. He showered and changed into clean clothes. And then the three of us sat down to talk about practical things. School for Sophie. She'd need to stay enrolled in her current school, which meant someone would have to drive her across town every day. Thomas's job search. He'd start sending out resumes right away. And money. I'd make sure they had what they needed. No questions asked. Dad, I can't just take your money, Thomas protested. You're not taking it. I'm giving it. There's a difference. But, Thomas, this is what family does. You'd do the same for Sophie if she needed it, wouldn't you? He nodded reluctantly. Then let me do this for you. That afternoon, I made my phone call to Richard Chen. We'd known each other for years, ever since I'd invested in his first startup back in the early 2000s. He'd done well, and so had I, Walter, he said warmly. It's been too long. How are you? I'm well, Richard. I'm calling about Sterling Imports. There was a pause. I'm listening. I know you've been looking at them. I also know they're on the edge of collapse. I'm wondering if you'd be interested in speeding up your buy timeline. Possibly. What's your interest in this? Personal reasons. Richard knew better than to pry. All right. What did you have in mind? I want you to make an offer. A generous one, but with conditions. What kind of conditions? I told him. By the time I hung up, the wheels were in motion. Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas threw himself into job hunting. He sent out dozens of resumes, went to interviews, worked with old co-workers. I could see the determination in him, the refusal to give up. It reminded me of myself at his age. Sophie adjusted to the new routine. Thomas drove her to school every morning, and I picked her up in the afternoons. We'd do her homework together at the kitchen table, and I'd help her with her science project, which was due at the end of the month. Catherine called a few times. The conversations were brief and uncomfortable. She wanted to know when Thomas was coming home, but she wouldn't commit to standing up to her mother. She kept saying she needed more time, that things were complicated. "I'm not coming back unless you choose me over her," Thomas finally told her during one call. "I'm not going to be disrespected in my own home. Sophie isn't going to grow up thinking that's normal." Catherine didn't have an answer to that. On the Tuesday of the third week, Thomas got a job offer. It wasn't glamorous, a project management position at a mid-sized company, but the pay was decent and there was room for growth. He accepted right away. "I start Monday," he told me that evening, grinning. "I can finally start paying you back." "You don't owe me anything," I said, "but I'm proud of you." That weekend, Sophie's science fair arrived. Thomas and I both went to watch her present her solar system project. She stood beside her display board, confidently explaining the features of each planet to the judges. When she got to Saturn, she said, "This one's special because it's flexible. The rings have been there for millions of years because they bend instead of break. My grandpa taught me that." The judges were impressed. So was I. After the fair, as we were loading the project into the car, my phone rang. It was Richard Chen. "Walter, it's done. Sterling Imports accepted our offer. The papers will be signed Friday morning. And the conditions? All in place, exactly as you specified." "Good. Thank you, Richard." "Walter, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you want a public apology written into the buy terms? That's unusual. Let's just say that some people need to learn the difference between actual worth and how important someone seems." He chuckled. "Understood. I'll see you at the signing." Friday morning came. I put on my best suit, the one I bought years ago for your mother's funeral and had only worn a handful of times since. Thomas noticed. "Dad, where are you going?" "Downtown. Business meeting." "What kind of business meeting?" "The kind that closes a chapter." He frowned but didn't push. I think he was beginning to understand that there was more to his old man than he'd realized. The signing took place in the conference room of Pacific Trade Solutions' downtown Vancouver office. Patricia Sterling was there, along with her lawyers and accountants. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. The weight of trying to save a failing company had clearly taken its toll. Richard Chen was there too, along with his legal team. And sitting quietly in the corner, watching everything, was me. Patricia didn't notice me at first. She was too focused on the documents, on trying to negotiate better terms, even though it was far too late for that. Her company was drowning in debt, and this buyout was the only lifeline she had. It wasn't until Richard said, "Before we proceed, there's one final condition that needs to be addressed," that Patricia looked up. "What condition?" she asked sharply. "The buying party has requested a public statement from Sterling Imports, acknowledging certain past business practices and personal conduct that reflected poorly on the company's values." Patricia's face went pale. "What are you talking about?" Richard slid a document across the table. "This is the statement that will be sent to the press immediately following the buy. It includes an apology for discriminatory hiring practices, elitist attitudes, and the mistreatment of employees and family members of employees based on economic background." "I'm not signing that." "Then there's no deal." Patricia looked at her lawyers. They looked at the numbers and back at her. One of them leaned in and whispered something. I could see the exact moment she realized she had no choice. That's when she finally noticed me. "You," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here as a representative of the primary investor," I said calmly. "Richard, would you mind introducing me formally?" Richard smiled. "Patricia, this is Walter Morrison, his Pacific Trade Solutions' largest private shareholder and the architect of this buy." Patricia stared at me. "You're Thomas's father." "I am." "You did this. You planned this whole thing." "I invested in a good company that saw an opportunity. Sterling Imports was failing long before I became involved. I just helped move along a transition that was going to happen anyway." "You're doing this because of Thomas." "I'm doing this because you treated my son and my granddaughter like they were worthless. Because you judged them based on where they came from instead of who they are. Because you looked at me, a man you'd never met, and decided I was nobody." I leaned forward slightly. "But mostly, I'm doing this because someone needs to teach you that worth isn't measured in family names or inheritances. It's measured in character, in strength, in how you treat people when they can't do anything for you." Patricia's hands were shaking. "You've destroyed my family's legacy." "No, I've given it a chance to continue under better leadership. Your employees will keep their jobs. Your company will survive. You will walk away with enough money to live comfortably, but you won't do it with your pride intact, and that's a price you pay for cruelty. She signed the documents, all of them, including the public statement. Her lawyers tried to soften the language, but Richard held firm. When it was done, Patricia stood up without a word and walked out. I never saw her again. That evening, I told Thomas everything. We sat in my living room, the same living room where I'd raised him, where he'd learned to walk and read and become the man he was. Sophie was in bed, and it was just the two of us. You did all of that for us, he said quietly. I did it because it was right. And because nobody gets to tell my family they are not worthy. What about Catherine? That's up to you. But whatever you decide, you'll decide from a position of strength, not desperation. Thomas was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I think I need to talk to her. Really talk to her. Not about her mother or money or any of that. About whether we still want the same things. About whether she can be the partner I need her to be. That's wise. And if she can't, then you'll rebuild. You're stronger than you think, Thomas. You always have been. Catherine called 2 days later. She'd seen the news about Sterling Imports. She'd read the public apology, which had been picked up by several business publications. She knew, she said, your father. He did this. He did. Patricia is devastated. She's barely speaking to me. Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay. Do you think I'm worthy? Not good enough. Not trying my best. Worthy. Do you think Sophie and I deserve your respect, your loyalty, your partnership? There was a long silence. I don't know, she finally said. And that was all Thomas needed to hear. The divorce took 6 months. It was civil, all things considered. Catherine got the house. Thomas got primary custody of Sophie, with Catherine having her every other weekend. They split the assets fairly. And because Thomas now had a good job and I quietly set up a trust fund for Sophie's education, there were no major battles over money. Sophie adjusted better than I expected. She was sad, of course, but she was also strong. Like Saturn's rings, she bent but didn't break. A year later, Thomas met someone new. Her name was Jennifer, and she was a teacher at Sophie's school. She was kind, funny, and she thought Thomas hung the moon. More importantly, she loved Sophie like her own. When Thomas brought her to meet me, I knew within 5 minutes that this was right. Your son talks about you constantly, Jennifer said, shaking my hand. He says you're the strongest person he knows. He's kind to say so. It's not kindness, it's truth. We had dinner that night, Thomas, Jennifer, Sophie, and me. We laughed and told stories, and Sophie showed Jennifer her science fair trophy, which had a special place on my mantle. Grandpa says that being flexible is more important than being hard, Sophie explained. That's how you survive. Jennifer looked at me and smiled. Your grandpa sounds very wise. After they left, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and thought about everything that had happened, about the choices I'd made, the roads I'd traveled, the lessons I'd learned. I thought about Patricia Sterling, who'd valued status over character and paid the price. I thought about Thomas, who'd learned that being knocked down isn't the same as being defeated. And I thought about Sophie, who was learning early that worth comes from within, not from anyone else's opinion. I'd spent 30 years in a textile factory. I'd lived simply, saved carefully, invested wisely. I'd never needed anyone to know how much I had. Because wealth, real wealth, isn't about what you show the world. It's about what you can do when the people you love need you. Patricia Sterling thought I was nobody. She looked at my simple house, my old car, my factory work history, and she saw failure. What she didn't see was the quiet power that comes from patience, from planning, from understanding that the loudest voices in the room are rarely the most important ones. I taught Thomas that lesson without meaning to, and now he was teaching it to Sophie. The money I'd built up over the years would outlive me. Some of it would go to Thomas and Sophie. Some of it would go to causes I cared about, scholarships for kids from working-class families, support for new immigrants, programs that help people rebuild after loss. But the real gift wasn't the money. It was the knowledge that your worth isn't determined by others. That family means showing up even when it's hard. That starting over isn't failure. It's courage. And that sometimes the quiet man in the corner is the one who holds all the cards. I finished my tea and stood up. Tomorrow I'd pick Sophie up from school. We'd work on her homework together, and I'd listen to her chatter about her day. Thomas would come for dinner, maybe with Jennifer. We'd be together, and that was worth more than all the money in the world. Patricia Sterling had asked my son if his family line was worthy. She'd meant it as an insult, a final cut to remind him of his place. But she'd been asking the wrong question all along. The question wasn't whether we were worthy of her family's name. The question was whether her family's name was worthy of us. And the answer, as it turned out, was no.